Licensed content is an extremely important aspect of Dead by Daylight's longevity. Without it, it's arguable that the game would have fallen off and faded into obscurity a long time ago, just like so many other asymmetrical multiplayer games have both before and since its release. As the game closes in on its 9th anniversary, and with the Five Nights at Freddy's chapter glaring into the office, I want to go back to the start and Dead by Daylight's first licensed content. So before Springtrap skyrockets killer queue times, let's have a quick talk about Halloween. Seriously, Survivor players have been complaining about Kaneki being in basically every match, and how long killer queue times have been, and that's just gonna get worse when FNAF hits. And despite the title, if the thumbnail didn't give it away, this video isn't about Yamori's mask. The Halloween chapter dropped into Dead by Daylight in October of 2016, only a few months after the game's launch. Which does make me wonder whether or not they were working on this license from before the game even came out. The chapter added the gameplay mechanic of the Obsession, which would be shown through the chapter's killer and survivor perks. Haddonfield was added as a new realm with Lampkin Lane as a map, Laurie Strode as a survivor, and of course, Michael Myers as the killer. The chapter is generally credited with putting DBD on the map with how faithfully they adapted the license, which gathered generally positive feedback from players and likely made other license holders feel a bit more confident about the idea of maybe letting behaviour work with their property, and honouring other notable horror IPs that would eventually make their way into the game. For example, it may have been a problem perk, but pre-Rework Knockout was perfectly fitting for Bubba as a character. It maybe wasn't exactly healthy perk design, but it was perfectly fitting for the character. Despite the chapter being generally well received, there's always been one aspect that's been under heavy scrutiny from a gameplay perspective, often cited as being the most problematic add-ons in Dead by Daylight, those being the Tombstone piece and Judith's Tombstone. But only add-ons in the game that allow a killer to bypass everything else and just outright remove a survivor from the game, with the only requirement being that Myers needs to be in Tier 3 Evil Within. If you're watching this video, I assume that you probably at least have some degree of knowledge of Dead by Daylight, but just in case, I'll quickly explain. Every killer in DBD has a power, and Michael's is the Evil Within. Not the game. He starts the match in Tier 1 as a 110% move speed killer with a shorter range on his lunge attacks. However, while he's in Tier 1, he has the undetectable status, meaning that his terror radius is hidden, so the survivors have to keep an eye out for him or listen for his breathing. After stalking survivors for a while, he goes up into Tier 2. Becoming a base 115% movement speed killer with a slightly faster window vault, along with default lunge range and a smaller terror radius of 16 meters. After stalking survivors even more, he can go up into Evil Within Tier 3. At base, this lasts for 1 minute, but can be extended with add-ons. In Tier 3, all survivors are automatically given the exposed effect, meaning they'll go down in a single hit regardless of their health state, unless they have endurance. His terror radius jumps up to the standard 32 meters, his lunge gets longer, and his vaults get even faster. This is partly why vault speed builds using Fire Up, Superior Anatomy, and Bamboozle are a thing. Tombstone Piece and Judith's Tombstone allow Myers to just outright kill a survivor while he's in Tier 3. He just has to walk up and grab them. Tombstone Piece will send Myers back down to Tier 2 Evil Within after he kills a survivor. But Judith's Tombstone won't, keeping him in Tier 3 for the remainder of its natural duration. This enables him to potentially kill more than one survivor during a single activation of Tier 3. This is why you'll often see Myers bring a Black Ward offering with double iridescent add-ons, using Judith's Tombstone with the Fragrant Tuft of Hair add-on to enable permanent tier 3 Evil Within. The trade-off of this being that it takes a lot longer to get into tier 3. Now, the changes I'm going to suggest for this aren't perfect. My main goal here was to try to keep the core identity of the add-ons, while making them feel more interactive and less frustrating from both sides. First up, the changes for how survivors would interact with it. When grabbed by Myers in tier 3 Evil Within, the survivor would be faced with a skill check. If they fail the skill check, they die just like they would with the current version of the add-ons, but if they pass the skill check, they'll get a short stun on the killer and a burst of speed to run away, along with maybe a small window of immunity from being grabbed again to prevent it just being stuck in a loop. I don't know what the exact numbers on it would be, but imagine the stun being as if you got a pallet dropped on you with enduring, and the burst of speed basically being a slightly weaker sprint burst, albeit one without the exhaustion effect. The skill check would start incredibly easy and get harder and harder the more you are stalked. Imagine going from basically original decisive strike difficulty to a normal skill check, then to an oppression or overcharge type of skill check, and then if you're fully stalked, you don't get the skill check at all and it just works the way it normally does and you die. My logic behind this change is that it adds a potential degree of counterplay to the add-on beyond just jump in a locker and force a grab, or die. It adds a means of potentially getting out of it, and most importantly, it removes the ability for a survivor to have not seen the killer all game, walk around the corner and just immediately get killed. Because realistically, if you manage to miss a skill check like that, yes, original Decisive Strike looked like that, if you manage to miss a skill check like that, there probably wasn't any saving you anyway. After being out of Myers' line of sight or in a locker for a certain amount of time, a survivor's total amount of stalk will gradually decrease. The rate at which it decreases going up when outside of his terror radius. I'm not sure about if hitting a survivor should remove some of their stalk meter or not, kind of like how Ghostface loses all stalk on a survivor when he hits them. I'm a little bit up in the air on that. Obviously though, these are some pretty significant nerfs, so here's some ideas for what we could do for the killer side as a trade-off. First, I'd decrease the amount of stalk required to activate tier 3 with Tombstone piece, or the full one, and also reduce the movement speed penalty on Judith's Tombstone. Not massively, but just a little bit to make up for the now additional time that you're going to have to spend stalking survivors even in tier 3. I think by doing this, it also lessens the need to bring play with your food, because as it is, the full Tombstone feels pretty awful to play without it. As it is, you need 2 stacks to be back at your normal move speed. You would actually be 1% faster, but anyway. And if you take a swing at someone, you lose a stack even if you don't hit them. So by changing this, it could open up at least some new build paths while keeping play with your food as a very viable option to use. Changing this lessens the need for a specific perk to make an add-on feel usable, which honestly I think the game could maybe do with across the board. Obviously, perk and add-on combos are a good thing to have, but I don't think you should need to have one to make the other one worthwhile. Probably a bad example since they're changing how haste and hindered work in the next patch from when I'm making this, but think about Legion for a second. How often do you see a Legion player run BFFs without haste perks like batteries included or nowhere? Quite simply, you just don't, because the add-on almost requires the perks to be even remotely useful. Next, a quality of life change where if you down a survivor in tier 3, you can pick them up and force the skill check. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to stalk downed survivors, and you'd potentially be risking a survivor getting back up for free, but I think this could alleviate some of the frustration that a lot of people that have gone for the Evil Incarnate achievement can attest to. It being incredibly frustrating getting 3 of the survivors and then just accidentally downing the last one, and having to let them wiggle out and then they get to a locker or something, and it's just very frustrating to do. The main and only real counterplay that Tombstone currently has from the survivor side is jumping in a locker and forcing a grab, which doesn't really feel too great on the survivor side and is just frustrating as a killer. So one change I'd consider is that when Myers goes up into tier 3 Evil Within, all lockers that aren't currently being used will be blocked for 15 seconds. For convenience, I'd propose a visual change, giving Myers a HUD indicator to show how stalked each survivor is. Kind of like how Ghostface can see how stalked each of his targets are. This would help because it would be a clearer indication than it currently is, with the survivor just going from white to varying shades of red. I think this could also feasibly work as an accessibility feature for colorblind players. This would also give Myers a quite rudimentary way of identifying if a survivor is nearby, depending on if the meter is slowly going down or not. Almost like Whispers, only even less reliable. On top of this, if a survivor does jump in a locker for long enough to get crows, they'll be able to just be grabbed out of the locker and killed immediately. But the crows will spawn at a much slower rate if Myers is nearby. I had originally thought of them not spawning at all if he was within a small area, but I realised that this would be a bad idea and adjusted accordingly to account for 2 story maps like The Game, RPD, and Midwich. This way we could also prevent pointlessly long locker standoffs and also prevent creating a guaranteed kill state. So when a survivor is fully stalked, they'll hear this sound cue, basically just as a warning to get to a locker or get out of the terror radius. This sound cue was in the game when Myers initially launched to warn survivors that he was close to reaching tier 3. But it was removed soon after it was decided that it gave the survivors too much information. But here, only the survivor at maximum stalk would hear it. In order to prevent survivors from trying to just hide forever, the more they've been stalked and let it go back down, the higher their minimum amount of stalk will be. Kind of like how the more times you wake up against Freddy, the faster you fall asleep again, when he has certain add-ons. They aren't perfect changes by any means, and it's not like I can playtest them to see if they would actually be any good, but I hope these ideas could at least be a start in getting Tombstone moved in a slightly healthier direction, enabling more counterplay to it, while also keeping its core identity, and hopefully lessening some of the frustrations that it brings, both to the killer and survivor side of the game. But yeah, that's the video. What did you think? Do you like the changes? Hate the changes? Somewhere in between? Would you just leave Tombstone as is? Feel free to tell me. A couple of the perks in this video, specifically Plaything and Discordance, have had different icons. These were part of a perk icon set by Wheatdraws, specifically his Freddy set, and I've left a link to his website in the description. There's sets for a lot of the killers and survivors, so go check them out, he does great work. As usual, feel free to leave a comment or click any of the buttons down below if you feel so inclined, and I'll hopefully see you all in another video sometime. Okay, thanks for watching. Later.